I want to introduce Tim Torbenson from Evo 820. I've had a relationship with him for many, many years. I rely heavily on him because I need to make sure that my FDA compliance is where it needs to be. And so I have the luxury of having Tim, and every time I get an FDA audit, he comes and sits in there with me.
For a fee.
Yeah, for a fee, of course. Yeah, listen, and it's well spent, believe me. I can't stress enough about having a good compliance when you have the FDA there and you don't know if they're going to issue a cease and desist or whatever the case may be. And I don't mean to scare anybody, but I don't like messing with any government agency, and the FDA is one of them. So I want to share a fun little story about Tim and I. Our last audit, which was maybe 8 months ago.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
About 8 months ago. Tim is so versed on the FDA regulations and all of that, he actually teaches the regulators and teaches the auditors as they go along. And it got into I was concerned because Tim pushed really hard back, and then she came back in and apologized the next day and said, I spoke with my boss and you're exactly right. And so that's the type of compliance I want. Educating the auditor on why we're doing the right things and they don't know what they're talking about. So anyway, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but invaluable in our practice and to implants specifically. So
well, thank you so much for that one. And that was kind of fun. Well, that's my sick mind as a regulatory guy. It was kind of fun to be, and this is not unusual because he was talking about his situation where I've been at 27 different audits now with the FDA and my clients. And this is one of the challenges we have in the dental laboratory industry is the majority of the inspectors don't understand what we do and what our true requirements are placed upon us by the FDA, and then what's not placed upon us by the FDA, because we are a medical device manufacturer by definition, but because we are so unique in what we do as per patient, everything we do is unique and one of a kind. And that is what I'm going to go through my presentation is basically who the FDA is and what we do. But more importantly, no, it's not like what I'm doing.
You made it better. Oh, there
we go. I'm using my finger on that one. Okay, I got it back. Okay, so more importantly, what I'm going to talk about today is the changes that have come within the industry, and what is going to be brought to you by Elos is how to incorporate the milling of custom abutments in your laboratory without having to even think about the FDA. Okay, that's the most important thing because there's a number of reasons why, and one of the reasons I like working with Elos, who I've been a consultant with them in the past, and I'm familiar with their regulatory procedures and processes, and they're probably the trustworthy and safest group that I've ever worked with. There's a lot of other companies out there. We all remember like NT Trading, remember them? Who don't exist anymore. That was because they were trying to dance around the FDA and got caught. So Travis said it, and I'm going to say it again. Pick the right partner that you can trust and know that they're always going to be there to support you, and put the energy into not only engineering it, but also from the regulatory side, okay? But today what I want to talk about is something a little bit different than what I've talked about before, is how to be compliant. Now I want to talk about, depending upon what your laboratory is doing, if you can approach everything that Travis just showed you and have Elos take care of all of your FDA regulatory so that you don't have to think about it. And that's what's called, I call it a controlled system. And the reason for that is it is already validated, and you're going to hear that word a lot tonight. It's a validated workflow that by the FDA, a process that they went through, so that in your laboratory, you follow the workflow and the FDA will not knock on your door, ever. You won't need me, okay? And that's going to be a choice that you can if you have a situation in your laboratory that you might fit into a validated milling center, which is an open system, and that's what Iverson is working under. Then you may need me and satisfy the FDA. We're going to go through the separation between the what two are tonight, and I'm talking fast just to make sure, one, we're on time, but only two, you understand exactly what your options are, okay? So let's talk about those two product codes. You saw PNP and you heard it mentioned, and you saw PNP and NHA together. Okay, so let's understand what that is when it's coming from our friends at the FDA. All right, so the product code NHA, which doesn't mean anything, it's not an acronym for anything, it's just a random code that the FDA gave to dental implant abutments. Okay, so all the abutments that you're using, no matter what they are, multi-unit abutments, the old UCLAs, whatever they are product code NHA, all right? So by itself, it means one thing. When you mix it with the PNP, that's when it gets into this controlled environment, which is validated, and we're going to talk about that tonight. And so that is literally a design software for the dental laboratory that is like, let's say 3Shape. 3Shape is a PNP. Exocad is a PNP. Okay, that's the product code for those systems. So it's when you blend those two together, this is what you get. Okay, now what is an NHA? When, let's say you're doing a case with a multi-unit abutment, there's no FDA. There's nothing. Okay, as soon as you go to a tie base or to a pre-mill, then the FDA involvement comes into play. And the reason for that is the FDA has defined both tie bases and pre-mills or tie blanks as unfinished devices. And you all know that they're not finished devices that can be put into the patient's mouth or in the patient's head until you do your work on them. You can't take a tie base and just deliver it into a patient's head. Doesn't fit. Same thing with a pre-mill. Doesn't fit. So that is where the FDA is coming into this new definition that involves with these two components. Sorry, wrong button. I have fat thumbs. So that's where we get into the situation where we have to talk about FDA involvement when we talk about the difference between an unfinished device and these finished devices. Okay, again, all right. So let's talk about regulatory and the FDA, and we'll make this, I think you're going to like what you see if you don't like the FDA, all right? And you've seen this slide, and this is when we talk about the validated digital dentistry workflow. That is the product code PNP NHA. That means that Elos has gone through the process to validate all of the scanners, the libraries, all of the abutment designs, where they're talking about the libraries that are available, the printing of the models, and all of the CAM systems and the milling machines that actually give you a finished device and that process that you've been going through, okay? What does that mean? That means that the FDA now says you have a validated workflow that has its own 510K clearance, which the abutments already have. So this is on top of that abutment 510K clearance, but it's now a validated workflow so that you don't have to deal with the FDA. They take care of that for you, okay? So we had mentioned that you have IMUS I-Core and you have VHF, which are the validated milling machines, but they've added the Roland and the Planmeca machines. And as Mo had mentioned, they're in the process of validating Amann Girrbach. So I know that there's more coming, that they're going to continue the process of adding more machines. But if you are the laboratory using any of these, you are 99% way there of being a validated digital workflow with Elos, because that is the major component and probably the most expensive. Okay? And if you have any questions, don't worry about raising your hand and asking me. Okay? I know I talk fast. So that validated workflow also includes Exocad and 3Shape. Okay? And that's the two. There's, like Mo had mentioned, there's no dental wings in here. But here's the most important part. I'm going to slow down because this is the part I really want everybody to kind of understand, is what is the risk mitigation. Now, Travis and I have been in on 2 audits with the FDA for Iverson Dental Laboratory. I've been with clients that have been, I've been either remote or sitting across the table from the FDA, and it's a sphincter tightener experience, without a doubt. You know, when someone says, I'm going to come to your lab and I'm the FDA, It's like, oh, okay, come on, sit down, I'll buy you lunch. No, not quite the way it goes. So this is your regulatory mitigation. One of the US FDA classifies those unfinished devices as class 2 medical devices. That's why I have a job as a consultant, is because that's what the FDA did in 2015. That was the date, the year when the FDA incorporated this new classification for the unfinished devices. And labs that are milling custom implant abutments with digital technology, then they have to go out and get a quality management system, which we do, and they have to register with the FDA. So that means they have to take their money and give it to the FDA every year to register with the FDA and then operate under a quality management system. Okay, and I know Iverson. Anybody else do that in their lab? I know Glidewell does for sure. I work there. Anybody else? Okay, good. We can avoid it.
To give you an idea, and sorry, Tim, to give you an idea, the registration this year was 10,000, just the FDA. And I would say compliance and QMS management is somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 30,000, depending on how much you're doing, how many complaints, CAPAs, all the other stuff. So Elos, through this PNP workflow, is saving you a ton of money, because think about how many abutments I have to do before I break even on that 30 grand.
Exactly. Yeah, very good point. Exactly. So, and as we know, I'm not going to mention any laboratories, but when the FDA shows up, and I've had clients who have always told me that they are obeying according to the FDA requirements, and the FDA shows up and they didn't shut them down, but they did delay their operations until they corrected all of their processes. It was very disruptive. So the FDA does, after all, it's a federal law enforcement agency. So people always think, well, the FDA, but they are truly, they have badges, they don't carry guns, but that they can come in and cause a disruption. So let's talk about how to avoid that. All right, so Elos solution is using the FDA cleared system that Travis has been going through quite clearly with the support of Mo and Eric, so that you can see that there was a lot of thought put into it, a lot of engineering. It's a very high quality system and easily to incorporate into your lab. But now that they have also taken the extra lengths to validate it with the FDA, so you can literally start tomorrow with never having to think about the FDA, because it's a validated, approved system by them. So you can be ensured that the compliance is handled by them, right? That has to be good news to laboratories. I know a lot of my clients, I'm encouraging them to move into this position instead of, and it doesn't do my business much good, but for the laboratory industry, it's actually the best thing to come around. And then, of course, helping to produce the restorations that meet the highest standards of quality. I think that was demonstrated in Travis's presentation, and reducing the risk of the liability that comes from having to interact with the FDA and being compliant with them is really a relief on your side. It can save you a lot of money, save you a lot of time and effort in managing a quality management system. Okay? I'm slowing down because I think I'm getting ahead and caught up, right? So let's talk about your options. Because I talked about that earlier. What are your options in your dental laboratory? And this is a section from the Elos Pre-Mill 510K. Okay, this is on this abutment. And this is where the FDA says that all digitally designed CAD/CAM abutments are, this is why I jump to this, either intended to be sent and manufactured at an FDA registered Elos MedTech approved milling center, or to be designed and manufactured according to the digital dentistry workflow. So that's either it's in a validated milling center, or it's someone who's following the validated digital workflow. The first one is the one that has to register, operate under my quality system. The second one,
Travis investing 30,000 to get the registration and
10,000 of the registration.
and maintaining your
yes,
QMS and all of that.
Yep, QMS, on top of the Tim's system, and then also the labor that goes into my people that do the complaints, CAPAs, and all of that. And then also self-policing, because I'm gonna have the FDA coming every 2 years predictably. And by the way, we've had 3 audits, just if you remember.
All right, that's right, we did have 3. One was remote, that's right.
So
Yep.
we get one predictably every 2 years. So we're gonna skip next year, or I'm sorry, we'll skip this year, we'll have one in 2026.
Right.
Predictable.
Right. And there's a reason why they have chosen to be a validated milling center. And I'm going to address that later in the slides, because you're probably wondering then, why is he doing it? We'll address it. Okay. So that is the statement that is in their 510K, and it's basically their indications for use statement. Okay. So that is where you will find this information, because I'm just repeating what the FDA said. It is the same statement for the tie base. So the pre-mill and the tie base is basically considered to be the unfinished devices that require these types of actions from the FDA. So it's the same thing. I don't have to read it again because it's just redundant, but I want to get a sense for you that it is in their indications for use statement from the law agency that is telling them how to operate under the quality system. So the PNP NHA digital workflow, how about controlled systems? So working within their system, and you saw all of the options of the components from Travis and the processes and procedures and the equipment and everything. Basically, you follow that recipe, and then you don't have to worry about the FDA. Because, and then also I want to mention that there's the options that we talked about before. And I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I want to also be timely. And I talked about these milling systems that are available. And I'm going to go a little bit off base here, a little bit, because I've talked about no enforcement, and they've talked about a specific resin you have to use, or in the listing that for the tie bases, for example, there's a specific zirconia that you have to use. But I'm just going to ask you a question that if the FDA never shows up, in those types of materials that are so, let's call them generic. I mean, how many different types of zirconia is there? Ooh, I have another question for you to validate this. What is the product code for powdered porcelain? Does anybody know? Of course you know. It's EIH, okay? And again, it doesn't mean anything, but how regulated is powdered porcelain? Is it regulated at all? Okay, it requires a 510K clearance. Does the laboratory know which powder porcelain you're using when you send a crown out? No, they can't tell. It's fired, correct? Zirconia product code, the pucks that you get and the discs that you use, is IAH. AIH. Okay, same product code as powdered zirconia. It falls in the same family in the minds of and eyes of the FDA. So how are they going to enforce that when they never come to your laboratory?
Yeah.
They can't, exactly. The same thing with the cements. They can't, because once it's in the restoration, it's done. And how does Elos regulate and control the system that we talk about, the controlled system? And they control it through the libraries, because there was a conversation, or it was mentioned in the conversation, that when you are using the controlled system, the validated digital workflow, the only way you can do that is you download the FDA libraries, correct? Correct. And that's how they control it. So you can only use their equipment, and you can use their abutments, and the CAM works within those mills. How are they going to enforce? Can you enforce anything else after that?
No.
No. Okay. You can take that anywhere you want. I just wanted to have that brief conversation, because the validation system can only go so far, and if the FDA never involves by interacting with you, how are they going to enforce it? The mills, yes. Elos, the CAM, all that stuff is coming from the control of and management of their digital libraries. So, so this is the FDA. This is my friend Andrew Steen, who works at the FDA. He and I talk about this, and I just sent him a letter tonight because I wanted to get it in writing. And I said, does a digital workflow laboratory have to have a quality management system? And he's a regulatory guy at the FDA, so I got like a 2-page letter from him. But this is the most important part that you care about. He says, at this time, there is no requirement that a user, basically a dental laboratory, of the FDA-cleared device with a PNP product code and to follow the system regulations on label, which is use of the device. So what is the on label? The on label is their indication for use statement. Okay, so that's where they lay it all out in the chart that's below that, what you have to use. Okay, so that is from the FDA, is that if you follow the Elos validated dentistry digital workflow, you do not need to incorporate, you'll never see me again. And you'll never see the FDA.
That's the most important part. You'll never see the FDA.
No, I thought it was all about me.
Listen, I'm telling you, it's not a fun experience.
Exactly true. And it's an expensive one because he said it was $9,086 to register in 2025. And the year before it was $7,650. Every year it's going up and it never goes down, right?
I think I paid $2,000 the first time. So 10 years ago it was $2,000.
It was $2,000. In 2006 it was $0. So think about that inflation. Man, more people get to pay. And what does it buy you? A guess. Anyway, so here you don't have to think about this. You just put it on. What did you say?
It buys you an audit.
It buys you an audit. Yeah.
I stress this workflow to everybody. Utilize Elos and their validated workflow, and don't self-police yourself and allow the FDA to come to your door. This allows you to not do it. If I didn't have the other FDA products that I have to on my biomedical side, I'm getting ahead, sorry. But
no, it's okay.
If I didn't have the other registered stuff that I need to have, I wouldn't register.
Yeah, you wouldn't need to. Right, and you can tell I'm telling people, this is what you need to do, but you'll never see me, which it doesn't help my business, but it helps your laboratories, and it gives you an opportunity to expand your laboratory in doing the most technically involved cases of, the implants, and instead of outsourcing to very expensive services that provide you with a finished device, do it in-house.
And without totally jeopardizing what you're saying, if you're a serious dental lab, maybe it does make sense to have some quality routines anyway. So maybe do not say goodbye to Tim when you stay out here. Maybe there is some common sense in actually having a QMS.
Well, yeah, and there is, and I have a complete new system that is just, it's called Intelligent Manufacturing, which is specifically the base minimum, which only helps you manage your digital dental laboratory. I'm not talking about it here, but it is available if anybody's interested in what Eric just spoken about. But let's move on. So here is what's a validated dental laboratory or validated milling center. So that is, again, I went back to my friend Andrew and I told him, I said, send me a letter. I sent a question, what is a validated milling center? And he said, thanks you for your email. Isn't that nice of him? A validated milling center is a dental implant abutment industry term for what the FDA considers to be manufacturing partner, more aptly defined as a contract manufacturer. So that takes a dental laboratory from where you are when you're doing crowns, bridges, dentures. That's all exempt under 807.65I. That's the Code of Federal Regulation. You're exempt under that. As soon as you enter into this, now you've become a contract manufacturer and you have to register with the FDA and you have to list. Okay? So that is the major difference. So that's what Andrew says there. You have to register and you have to list and operate under our quality system. That is the only difference, is that you are doing it without following the validated digital workflow. So with this situation, you can use any scanner, you can use any software, you can use any mix of equipment, any restorative material, and you can expand the services. This is what Iverson Dental Laboratory is doing, is they've incorporated other devices or appliances that require FDA involvement. This is where where you need to register and license. And sleep appliances like Airways Technology, all those kind of things, that is where you get into a situation where you're a contract manufacturer for that 510K holder. You need to become a validated center. Orthodontic aligners, you can incorporate that into your laboratory and other things. And then with the surgical guides, I want to take a couple of minutes just to clarify that, because the surgical guides, if you're just doing a surgical guide that is coming out of, let's say, three-shape implant or studio, correct? Is that what it's called?
Or real guy?
Either one, yeah, exactly. And then if you just do that, that surgical guide is not regulated by the FDA. So if you're just doing surgical guides, that's fine. And let's say if I'm doing it in my dental laboratory and I brand that surgical guide as Tim's surgical guide, now I've become a manufacturer of a device that is branded. I need to register it and incorporate it under a quality management system. So that's how I tell people, when I'm sorry, I'm going to explain the FDA, and when I get done, it's going to be clear as mud, because that's the way the FDA is. And that is a perfect example of a surgical guide.